Tatsala oekalo liloitsa. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to see you. Welcome. My name is Beth Piatot, and I'm the Interim Director of the Center for Race and Gender. It's my honor today to introduce our distinguished lecturer, Professor Margaret Newden of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I want to begin, as we should always begin, by acknowledging that we're meeting today on Huichin Ohlone land. This land always has been and always will be the homelands of the Huichin, and we commit ourselves to supporting the needs and desires of Indigenous peoples to live in and with their homelands. Each year, the CRG hosts a distinguished lecturer. This is a special program that highlights the profound contributions of a scholar whose work engages social justice. In 2019, the International Year of Indigenous Languages, it's my honor to present as our distinguished lecturer, Professor Margaret Newden, whose work as a poet, linguist, and language teacher and literary critic has advanced Indigenous language revitalization and illuminated the incredible beauty and richness of Ojibwe language, aesthetics, and life worlds. This talk is co-sponsored by the Designated Emphasis in Indigenous Language Revitalization and the MCC, the Multicultural Center, where we're meeting today. After Professor Newden's talk, please join us, stay for a reception in the back. Professor Newden earned her PhD in English and Linguistics and an MFA in Creative Writing, all at the University of Minnesota. She's the author of 3 books, Bawajimo, A Dialect of Dreams in Anishinaabe Language and Literature, Waweni, Poems in Anishinaabemowin and English, and an Anishinaabemowin textbook. She has edited and published essays in numerous anthologies and journals, and her poems have been anthologized in New Poets of Native Nations, Sing, Poetry from the Indigenous Americas, Poetry, the Michigan Quarterly Review, Waterstone Review, and Yellow Medicine Review. She's a strong advocate for education and community engagement through relevant research and teaching. In Milwaukee, she works with the First Nations Program and the Milwaukee Public Schools, the Milwaukee School of Languages, and the Milwaukee Indian Community School, and the Urban Ecology Center. I also want to say, on a personal note, that Professor Newden has been an incredible inspiration and support to me. The first time I met Professor Newden was at a Modern Language Association meeting in Chicago, and I remember her talking about Chicago being an Ojibwe word for onion fields. Is that right? I was so in awe of her, I could barely talk, like in any language. I was struggling to introduce myself in Nimi-Putimt, in Nez Perce language, and she just very patiently waited for me to trip over all my words and introduce myself. And we've been great friends since. Since that time, I've seen her do many amazing things, like sing Beyonce's Ave Maria and Patsy Cline's Crazy in Ojibwe, translate into Ojibwe and write a commentary responding to the Greek on a poem by Sappho, and teach the Michigan football team to sing the school song in Ojibwe. Most recently, by which I mean on Tuesday, I called her during my class and asked her to read one of her beautiful poems to my students, which she kindly complied. So I could go on, but I actually don't want to delay your experience of hearing from our amazing guest today, who's dedicated her formidable skills to the future of Indigenous people. Professor Newden's talk is titled Ojechakawak Waseyaziwag. Radiant Souls, 4 Women Masters of Social Self-Expression. Liloitsa.
Gumigwetchen, Optico and Gitchenenda, Mompi Biayaya. Hopefully this will go well, and I'm sure he'll adjust sound if needed. It's always nice when somebody does the introduction that includes acknowledgement of the people here, because so often when you go and you give talks, you look that stuff up and you make sure you're ready, but it's really great to not do that when somebody else welcomes the group in that way. It's very nice. And I guess what I want to do is try and give you a short mix of both poetry and some theory about social issues and philosophy, and just see how it all unfolds for you, mixing those things together, and then actually you can go away saying you kind of engaged with and heard, and maybe even at the end we'll sing a little together in Ojibwe. It should be fun, and then we'll leave time for questions. So that would be the goal. So the title of the talk is Ojichakwak Waseazewak, which I've translated as Radiant Souls, but that's how it sounds right in English. That would be reversed. Ojichakwak is the word that we use for soul, and Waseazewak would be those who are radiating. And the four people that I picked to look at here are women who have made a difference in their life, but beyond their life. And all of them wrote or told stories about their lives and had things to say about the way we might view the world and how we might make a difference in it. So these are really arbitrary pairings on my part in some way, but also I think to get at the way we think about diversity. So often you would see a list of women who made a difference and you would see one from each group. And I think one of the things that I wanted to do was say, we put people together sort of by the work that they do and the way that they think and the ripples they leave in the world, not necessarily because we have categories, so let's choose one in each group that, reflect how we think. So hopefully this will give you lots of different things to think about. I do want to begin by saying Namigwechwiak, Nigansajik, so thank you to those who are the leaders here. Mawan Jirigamik, Ejinisadotan Bakanziang. I had to think about how I would translate the Center for Race and Gender Studies. Those of you that speak Ojibwe will recognize that that basically says the place where we meet to understand our differences. I don't think we have a word yet for race or gender. I'm sure if we had a group of elders around, we would come up with multiple options, but I also thought the spirit of the place was actually that we are understanding differences. Minwa Migwech Wianaguk, Ga Bidagoshiniak, Jabizendawiak, and that's all of you. Thanks for taking time out of your day to come and hear some Ojibwe. Being from the Great Lakes, I'm on the western edge of the continent, and I know that we've had many people removed from our area to this space, and so we often have people out in this region speaking Ojibwe, but I've actually never been here before, so it's really nice of you guys to come and share an hour or two here. So as I said, what I wanted to do was talk about how these women make differences. I gave you a slightly longer translation of the title, Ojichakwak Waseazewak. Ojichak is the word that we use for soul, but it also is a word that means reflections. Sometimes when we're talking about reflections in water, we would use that same word. And then wase is energy or light or something that's emitted. So in a way, the other thing that we could do if we're talking about radiant souls, we might be talking about reflections of people's spirit, their energy, in context and how they impact each other, which is one of those things that when you get into translating Indigenous languages, you realize that moving from one language to another just involves so much meaning on either side that you have to balance. Which do you privilege? Which do you lean on? Which direction will you go in? I just always like to give a little agenda, like where we're going. Here's the here's the roadmap. So the Debajimoans that's the word that I use for poems. Debajimo is a story, so a Debajimoans is kind of just a little story. We have two types of stories. Adazokanak are animate, and they are more kind of mythic teaching stories. Debajimoan are sort of little bits of news or sort of more contemporary things. So I've balanced it here between sort of creative writing, little bits of news, little sort of contemporary poems reflecting on different topics, and then the points that I wanted to share with you, which are how we think in Anishinaabe Ndamong, and then these four women, these Niwan Ikwewak, and what we make of what they leave for us. So all of this began, and I guess we have the little broadside somewhere now. I, of course, didn't bring one up here, but we have, Beth, you see them on the thing, right? You could just hand one around if you want. That gives people to look at one. So this started because in Ann Arbor, there is a Labadee collection of Emma Goldman's writings. And actually, it goes beyond Emma Goldman. It really is supposedly one of the larger collections of anarchist writing at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And I had a long running debate with a good friend over whether or not anarchism was something that was recent and more in response to modernity and the the Industrial Revolution and all these things. And I said, well, heck no. No, that is just the way Anishinaabe people think all the time, really. And we would go on and on and on about this. And he would always fish out a new quote that would somehow, be a new angle, a new rabbit hole we could follow. But one time he came up with such a good quote of hers that I thought, yeah, that just to me proves it yet again. Here she is saying just what I feel like I've heard many elders say many times before. So I wrote a poem after kind of examining this quote. So the quote that she had is, "The problem that confronts us today and which the nearest future is to solve is how to be oneself, and yet in oneness with others, to feel deeply with all human beings and still retain one's own characteristic qualities." I had no idea I would be in the Multicultural Center. Somehow it all works out, right? The universe provides the venue you need to make this point. But again, when I went to translate that into Anishinaabe, when Nongum Minowa Awaswabong Boch Nisadot Zoyang, Gaya Nisadot Tangedwa, Mayagazijik, Mona Dendamongedwa, Minowa, Mom Kadendaziyang, Ejibimadaziang. It gets a little different. It gets at the fact that what we actually are trying to do when you remove ideas of being oneself and having oneness, which you find in the English quote, and you have that appear as verbs, it's really understanding yourself in order to understand others, the way that you show respect. So the words that I put here from my translation, Nisadota Dizoyang, is really the idea that we have to understand ourselves in order to understand others. So that's, you can see there's linguists in the room. You can see the conjugation going back and forth, but that's one of the things that happens in our language. We have a core idea expressed as a verb, and we repeat that and really play with it and move it around. And I've realized that over time now, being older and having wrestled with this language predominantly, that it influences how much I repeat in English. So it's a very good thing that I'm not a first-year comp teacher, because I would tell all my students to just repeat all their adjectives all the time, because that's how you make sense of it. Say it over and over different ways. But that's really not what we do in English. In English, you want to find a new adjective or a new adverb all the time. So it's interesting to see those differences in the way the languages work. And then Mayagaze starts out, that's the word that we would use for a stranger or an immigrant or someone that's new, that's not currently a member of our community. It's someone that is just unfamiliar. It's a basic recognition of whether or not someone or something, really, you could conjugate it to be that, is unfamiliar. And then Mana Dendamongedwa is the word we use for respect, but it's also tied to the core idea of honoring others. So it's not respect up a hierarchy. It's really actually honoring, putting yourself lower, right? So there's a difference between you see someone and you say, oh, they're higher than me, versus you say, wow, that is someone I want to be humble to. Just different ways of doing the very same thing. Mam kadendase, this is probably the one word that is overused in all of my classrooms. I teach everybody to say it all the time. Mam kadendase, so they're having to learn to say, I am amazing all the time. Because you can do that. So you can have a word that means amazement, but you can very easily shift it into amazing yourself, being amazed by others. And then Ejibimadaziang, one of our more common phrases is Ani Ejibimadaziang. We say that all the time, kind of like, how are you doing? Like, you're just casually putting this whole phrase out there. But when you peel that one back, Madazi is the bit that means to be alive, to actually be radiating or moving or having energy yourself. And when you say Bimadazi, then you're doing that with forward momentum. And what we put on the ending is whether I'm talking to you about the way I might do that with others excluding you, or whether I'm assuming you're all in it. That ending says you're all in us, right? So just in that, I'm telling you clearly as the audience, well, I think we should all do this, including you. Maybe if you were a different audience, I would have used a different ending. And so then this is the poem that came from sort of reflecting on the differences in her quote. So I have this way of always having things be half songs and half poems. I'm not very good at reading them, so we'll just see how they come out. I can't sing them in English, and I can't read them very well in Anishinaabe one, so we'll just give them to you how they came out in my head originally. So Nakweshkadadida is where we where we come together, where there's a middle space that we both are, how we might be balanced in each other's presence. So, me wenja dagana gademigat, gigosh quadgo bijanang, ondadazi yang gijigang, minawa aking. Nongam jabwing gosh quadwa dizyang, nisidota dizyang, mashkamik wendamang, gakina wea, hina wendi yang. Na kweshko da da da, nongama king oma, jibwa jibayake aying, biskamang na pwagananong. Wabangwa gani Jonathan Anik. So I put the English up there so you guys can read them as you hear them. And I hope that at some point in time, other than my dad, who is my biggest fan of all, and then maybe Beth is second, there are things that we can embed in here. So like if we say in Anishinaabemowin that Napkwagaanong, that's actually our word for the Milky Way as well. So there's whole metaphors that you have in one language that you might not have in another. So that was the poem that started this conversation. And just to give some sense of how, when you use translation as a methodology or a way of viewing the world, a way of looking for different patterns, which is essentially what I do. I'll look for theories through the language as I do translations, or as I try to create something just first in Anishinaabemowin and then worry much later about the English. The key things to know for you guys are that Anishinaabemowin is mostly verbs. It's centered on action. The world can be described as this whole network of relationships. So you're always standing in the center saying, what is going on around me, or what happened before, or what will happen after. Language is a response to others, so you're very, very sensitive all the time to who are you talking to when you speak. Are you including those that you're talking to? Are you meaning to include people that you might be with in a group, but not who you're talking to? Always sorting that out. There's different groupings that you could choose from how you might think in English. And what happens then is that you have truth and knowledge really being the sum of all this shared memory. So the way that we pile up our information, the way that we put things together, whether we can hold on to that collectively, now we might say, let's publish it. That's what we have to do. We have to publish it. Well, I mean, we might need to publish it, but that's just in this minute. What we have to do is write something good enough to be remembered. I don't know if my tenure committee would have gone for that, but that should be what it matters, right? We have to think about how we put things out in the world. For people who are the linguists in the group, we have a plural first person that can include or exclude. We have a second person that can be singular or plural. These are some of the differences between English and Anishinaabemowin. And the third person is just ween. So we don't have a gender in the third person, which is nice. It makes all those awkward moments we all had while writing our papers in school. Do I say him, her, she, he, they? I don't know. We just say ween, So actually, we don't even use the pronoun very often, but when we conjugate, it connotes just third person. And then we have two noun classes, which I try to speak about very carefully because they have been given descriptions that I think have in some ways created big barriers in how people going forward learn our language. So we have two noun classes. Every noun belongs to one or the other. But in fact, if you're a very fluent speaker, depending on the story you're telling, you might speak of one in a category that it is not normally in. You have to know the verbs that go with each category so that when you view a noun a certain way, you're just matching things up. So it's more about knowing the patterns and matching. And every noun will probably have a most common category, but many, many, many times they can switch, which is very different than English, where things are black and white or right and wrong, and it feels to people who have grown up speaking English and sometimes not learning a second language, Ojibwe can feel extremely hard, but I don't think it is, so I'll have to come up with good enough curriculum to convince people it's not. But the place that it leads me to in terms of the The anarchist tendencies is there is very little desire to impose Beijigwendan or any kind of uniform thinking on all speakers. Like that is just not to be done. Many, many, many times, even just over lunch, we were having a casual conversation and it came up right away. Well, you know, if you had 3 elders, they'd all have a different word. It's so true. That is really the core of the language, that everyone has the right to think in their own way about what's happening around them, and also, by extension, to define their relationships in their own way. So this idea of a minobimadaziwin, a healthy or good life, would be the concept of having this sort of balanced journey where your freedom is at all times protected. And so then I thought, well, how do we put these things in context? I can't really talk very long without bringing up my daughters, so Nitana Mazinbiga Kwe, she Kinomage Awede Manhattan, Nonga Minwa Nitana Mikwe Zans, Geabe Ijat Kinomage Gamagong, Ann Arbor, Michigan. So both daughters have grown up speaking the language in a sort of not fully bilingual way. There's many things that go on in the world that we did not make time to learn or to say in Anishinaabemowin, but both of them have a pretty good grasp of it. The older daughter graduated last year from Michigan, took that as her language, which we were so pleased she could do. So making space for Indigenous languages and having them count for your language credit, that's a thing I've seen change in my lifetime. So for instance, in my father's lifetime, it wasn't even offered as a language in college. When I took it, it was culture credits, but I had to take a real language. I had to take French or Latin. And then now it actually counts as a language. So you see a lot of change happening pretty quickly in terms of revitalization. And this was a piece that we had in the Minneapolis Institute where my friend Heidi Erdrich had done a show on how we need to think through our own cultural lens. So, Pi Anishinaabe Bi Gaya, Dash Giton, Nagamo Bia, Nambing, Nambishgendang, Wigwamegong, Chigameng. Just trying to say about the ways that I can think differently when I write. Anishinaabe Bige would be to write in the language. And then when you do that, you start thinking very differently about everything around you. So if I started to say, all right, if I want to give a talk about women that have made a difference in the world, where do I begin? Where do I start that? It might be that I look for individuals and their histories and their contributions. But on the other hand, if I listen to Anishinaabemowin, I should look backwards before I look forward. So this was a little piece that I wrote about my own family and the women that sort of influenced me. Wabuanong so swaning namamashtanshi owning wiganan nin ocean sak nimiwad wabmagwa nan godnong shikewad nan godnong nijewad Gibako amji gazawat, sakan enamohat, noka joming weniwat, minwa mashkawiden. So I had to think about who were the women that influenced me and raised me and encouraged me to do the things that I did, and then think about who might have influenced them or who changed the world that they were in. So I came up with these 4 because, as I said, we began with a quote from Emma Goldman. I'm excerpting relevant facts for comparative reasons here. There are obviously many, many more things about each of these individuals that I would encourage people to look up. But one of the things about all the 4 that I chose were that they did a lot of writing, they did a lot of thinking, they put a lot of words out into the world, they lived in many places, they spoke different languages, had many things that they did defined as work, but also defined as being a change agent. And they each were very interested in how their words would live on. So just to kind of summarize time-wise some of the places, so Emma Goldman, you can see the years that she was around in the world, and the places that she lived. There were many. There was a lot of moving back and forth. She worked in a corset shop as a seamstress, a nurse, owned an ice cream shop. Some of these things I forget till I remind myself of them. And what she was remembered for were some of the acts that were very visible, sometimes the acts that were misunderstood, all of the politics that surrounded her. But basically, she was trying to change the things that she saw going around her. The quotes that I tried to pull out for each of these folks, I was looking for ways that they echoed across one another. So the three from her were about rights and voting. The right to vote or equal civil rights may be good demands, but true emancipation begins neither at the polls nor in courts. It begins in a woman's soul. History tells us that every oppressed class gained true liberation from its masters through its own efforts. So I thought, now that's very applicable to the people that I know and the communities that I work within. How do we, for ourselves, create the change that we want? Then thinking about ideas of property and capitalism and industrialism and the space that we all have to share now. This is another thing that she wrote. The only demand that property recognizes is its own gluttonous appetite for greater wealth, because wealth means power. The power to subdue, to crush, to exploit, the power to enslave, to outrage, to degrade. I could translate that in one word into Anishinaabe one, which would pretty much be Wendigo, if you know Wendigo stories. So we have an entire set of stories that really address greed and the desire for things and excess and using them in ways that are not constructive. And at the end, this was where I pulled the title from when she was expressing, I want freedom, the right to self-expression, everybody's right to be beautiful, radiant things. And so some of the things that she said as an anarchist really, truly do resonate in so many ways with the task of language revitalization and just with the task of decolonial life in indigenous communities. I think in many global settings, you find people struggling for freedom in scenes that they can't control. It's as if you're set upon a stage that you did not plan the set or design the play or have any control over that. So I think seeing how these different people responded to this was the thing that I wanted to do. So here's another highly controversial character, Margaret Higgins Sanger, and she witnessed a lot in her life, but I think some of the critical things that get at the background or context for the quotes that I wanted to talk about were the fact that she was born into an Irish Catholic family of immigrants and was originally living in New York. She talked a lot about the fact that her mother was pregnant 18 times. 11 of the children survived. She, I think, was the sixth of the siblings. And then she married a political activist. Given the time that these women were in and the geographic location that they had, they ran into some of these ideas. And she had her own children. She raised a family, and she also worked as a nurse, an educator, an activist. She was a founder of multiple clinics. She published a very short-lived journal called Women Rebel, but the Birth Control Review was the thing that she was really known for, doing a lot of sex education. It's something that now I just don't think people think twice about. I think that it's something that a whole generation of women may have forgotten, and I'm thinking maybe of my daughter and her teenage friends in high school. You know, some of this history and what the women had to kind of go through and how they had to fight for a voice to talk about some of these things could be forgotten by youth today. So it's worth, I think, looking back and remembering, well, what was their context? What were they struggling for? And why was it important for them to control their words and the medium? So that little review became a huge issue. The Comstock Law, Comstock Act of 1929 actually was to say that no information about birth control could go out in the U.S. Postal Service, which now one just wonders the way the media is. I mean, it's almost like what can't be out in the media. Now we struggle to debate what we can or can't say on Twitter and on Facebook and what's fake news and real news. But there was a time even in this, the nation that we're currently part of, which I would say is still a sort of short-lived nation, that there was much more control from the top down. And so this is one of the things that she fought against. I loved this picture because this is clearly a community that she's in. We remember individuals, but I think we sometimes forget all the people that they work with. The idea that organized charity itself is the symptom of a malignant social disease. We could just think about that for a long time. But really, what is the notion of charity? What is good charity? What is honorable charity? How do you respect others and help them in ways that are the ways they want, they need? I suppose as a language-focused person who has seen many people come into communities and want something from the community or want to give something to the community. I always have colleagues on my campus who say they want to help the Indians. Can I take them to the reservation? And that can be a long conversation, and then that unfolds and we start learning what each side wants and why they want it, and we think about what is charity. She also had comments about free speech. I care nothing for free speech in and of itself. All of us place too much value on the power of the printed word and the power of the spoken word. We read too much, we listen too much, we live too little, we act too little. I speak to you by my actions, past and present. And there again, it's circled back to a thing that for me, when I translate things into a language that is mostly actions and verbs, she's asking for something different to be prioritized, the actions, not necessarily the power of something made physical and controlled and or sold or distributed, but just the fact that you act, that you're reflecting your ideas through what you do. At the end, too, to what her comments about expression, by knowing ourselves, by expressing ourselves, by realizing ourselves more completely than has ever before been possible, not only shall we attain the kingdom ourselves, but we shall hand off the torch of life undimmed to our children and the children of our children. So again, that's another one where to me that just resonates with so much of what I've heard. People in indigenous communities, in my community in particular, you have to think beyond the moment you're in, beyond the actual generation that you are part of, maybe even beyond the generation you feel immediately responsible for. People will often say, well, we should think 7 generations forward. But I think we also have to think backward and think about the larger context overall. So then the third person, Zitkala Sa, who often is known more for her contributions to literature, I think is one of the reasons that she's often brought up. She did a lot to really early ethnography was not necessarily in the hands of indigenous people or people who were multi-ethnic initially. It was something that people felt was done to informants or informants would provide, and there was sort of a commodification of stories. And I think that was something that for many years she was known for being a change agent in that sense. But I think people forget how much she did politically. Her own history is that she was Yankton Dakota on her mother's side and German American on her father's side. She lived on 2 different reservations extensively enough to get to know them fairly well. The time that she spent in each place really was reflected in the work that she did. And she also lived in Oklahoma and Washington, D.C., which are 2 extremely cosmopolitan sites of politics for indigenous people. The diversity of languages and cultures and histories in Oklahoma is, I think, maybe more extreme than many places in North America. And then Washington, D.C., too. I mean, this was for her the site of where things changed. She worked as a composer, a teacher, an author, an organizer, a liaison to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, advisor to the Merriam Commission, and then was founder of the National Council of American Indians, which is still in existence today. It is the #1 thing that I will tell people, go look at that if you want to see all the nations that are there. ncai.org, it's still there. And it has proven to be something that lived on long after her time to help people lobby together from an indigenous standpoint. And some of the things that she said when she talked about her political beliefs and things she had seen and experiences that led her to her own philosophies. My heart and I lie small upon the earth, like a grain of throbbing sand, drifting clouds and tinkling waters, together with the warmth of a genial summer day, bespeak with eloquence the loving mystery round about us. So we had previously somebody speaking of the kingdom and how we have the mystery here. We have a lot of things that are unexplained, but the words that people choose to express that differ. What they're listening to and the fact that they're putting themselves, in this case, she's definitely putting herself in a space where she's considering other things around her to have agency, not necessarily be resources. So it's pretty amazing that she would hold these views and also work for the BIA, right? So she was somebody willing to get in that space that was shifting the world in ways that she felt were not right and try to get people to see differently. Their next little quote is about a bird, yellow breast, swaying upon the slender stem of a wild sunflower, warbles a sweet assurance of this as I pass nearby. He yields himself to his song of joy, and truly does it seem his vigorous freedom lies more in his little spirit than in his wing. And that one too, the fact that the bird has spirit, the fact that you would look to a bird to learn something about freedom, the fact that the bird's actions are the thing that are his symbol for freedom. These comments about a bird could be something that a person might really easily write off. Oh, those Indians, they love nature. And that's the kind of thing that, for a long time people would have a surface understanding of Native culture, but I don't know that they took it to a level where they would make a comparison of philosophies. And actually, when you hear people say now things about the land and the water having rights, having agency, you can see where those things come from. They come from very, very old stories. And also about her thoughts on freedom of mind and freedom of thought. The greatest gift in life is consciousness, not positions, not the dollar, but that the Almighty Spirit gives us life, and we have a rational mind with which to see all the wonders of the universe. So again, I don't know, could be Emma Goldman, could be Zitkala Sa. I think that to look for the ways that these women were expressing themselves through what they had learned and what they knew about the world and what we can learn by observing the world was what I was trying to do. And then the last person that I wanted to include, partly because so often in any group, there's one Indian, or they're not there because they're not statistically significant. We've all seen those reports. But in this case, really, you have very different ways to be a Native woman in America at this time, to be thinking about how do you understand the nation around you, how do you make a difference. So Maud Keg, Nawakamago is a woman that was from Mississauga. When I was looking up her story of her life, I thought, isn't it beautiful that for the most part, when I have to describe where she's from, many of those places are places that their name is still first in the Anishinaabeg language. So if you know where the Great Lakes are, and in Minnesota, that whole state of Minnesota is mostly Ojibwe and the Oceti-Sakowin, so you have the Dakota, Lakota people in the southern half. And it's a pretty clear line when you get to the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers there in Minneapolis and St. Paul. We used to say when I went to college there, if you weren't Dakota or Ojibwe, you pretty much pretended to be one or the other. There might have been people from other nations there. I'm sure there were, because Minneapolis, during especially the American Indian movement, had a lot of indigenous diversity, but you definitely feel in that space. If you go north, you're in Ojibwe worldview and in Ojibwe country. If you go south, you're in Dakota country. You're on the prairies. It's a different way. So she was born during rice camp at Manomin Ganajikaneng and near Zinagamak, and her mother and father both had, I wanted to choose the words carefully here. They had committed to live together and raise a family, but they have in her memories a clear description of how they met and had started a family. And when her mother died early, through all these stories that she's talking about life up there and she's remembering her life, it's a collection of people that raise her. To the extent that when John Nichols was translating this, he had to be very careful to explain that when she says mama, that's not necessarily her biological mother. She didn't really have a memory of her own biological mother. She had many, many people who mothered her, who raised her. So she moved with her family between different seasonal activities. She, of course, was very fluent in Anishinaabe language, and that was her first language. But she managed, on her 8th grade education, she was one of the few in her area that went to as much school as was available to her. And she learned English and was a translator and worked as a tour guide and was often telling stories. She had 11 children, was an artist, interpreter, teacher. You see resonances between what these women do. They do it differently if they're in Manhattan in cafes with anarchists than if they're in rice camps raising 11 kids. But I think in some ways they're very similar. They're observing the world, they're soaking up as many stories as they can, they're learning how to retell them, they're thinking about what they might want to change or improve or what's important to remember. We have less of Maud Kegg's writings than we do of, say, Margaret Sanger or Emma Goldman, or even Tsitkala Sa, who was also a very copious writer. But I think that it's important to include her and many women from many different nations like her, because the fact that she could express herself in her language means that when she says something, she's actually giving us a wider worldview than if someone had just put down those thoughts for her in English. I gave you both here, and I always worry that it will come across these statements. To me, they sound really beautiful and complicated and have this nice high rhetorical value in Anishinaabemowin. I think they don't come across that way in English, but it's more true to just put the actual meaning there. So the first one is about a time where she actually, according to the story she was telling, could have drowned, and how she responded to that. Ingi kendan winago zegazian, magja gae ga kwashkwanewanan, banemada shego minawagi kendaman iwede ganawab magwa ingu giguyak, enuek igona enonch ejinagazewat, agwada shingingu, angod non gae and dabe sho in a gonawenamigok. And basically, to me, what's beautiful about that is her response to being in that level of danger was to look at the fish and look at the fish looking at her, right? That you're in this space and you don't feel that there's no human here to help me, so it's all going south. There's fish, you're in an environment that you know well, and so the sense even that the fish are watching her too. I mean, just there's so much packed into that thought. The next one, she's speaking about the woman she calls her mother, who was her biological grandmother. Mish iu mada jimotawit. Enda mijakwak eyangodnong. Mish iu maja demotawit. Eyanigogenit inu anongun. Me wenja gawika gi wanja shiwak ingu nibadibik. And again, it sounds very simple when you just have the English. She would tell me stories. But the way that she embedded the idea, if you look at that third word in, ma dibad or dijimowat. So she's got in there this sense of starting and telling to somebody. She's made it a transitive animate verb. She's done so much with one word to talk about the relationship that's created by the storytelling that's told. And the fact that the stories that were important to convey were science and geospatial location and history, that there were stories being told, there was a sense of knowledge that needed to be passed down. And the fact that when she says at the end, otherwise they used to be, they would know these things and not get lost in the night. The word she uses for night, niba, debik. Niba is the word for sleep. Debik is closer to the word for night. So the fact that she says niba, debik, it's a different kind of night. So that where they were lost is a bigger thing. I think that the metaphors embedded in some of these indigenous languages are sometimes lost when we just try to put them into English. So what she's really saying is these people never used to get lost when they were in darkness. You could have a whole conversation again about just that idea of how do you keep a people from being lost? What do they need to know to not be lost? The last one, she's talking really about women and possessions, just by way of comparing some of the other things the other women talked about. Gishbenikwe nebot mia a ogichidakwe, esingnang inu ikwean odayaminit, akinagego, migo gai debishko ejichigang nimiding, migwe went inu odayamin. So odayamin isn't stuff, gego is stuff. None of the thing is really named of possessions. Actually, that's just things that are had, things that you have a connection to, odayamine. So there are these things that once you're gone, you don't need, but their redistribution is pretty important. And so people have dances. People might wait a year, they bundle them up, but actually having things and having knowledge, having whatever a woman had used to define herself or collected to herself, redistributed is important. I mean, I don't think we think about that much either. It's another thing where when we talk about how we might confound the shackles of capitalism, if we are not in need of things that then we must possess and keep and protect, then that's a level of freedom to not have to worry about that and to know that when you're gone, someone else will come along and they will be given to others who might use them. So to me, I think she was an anarchist thinker. I think that she was at all times expressing her freedom, being in the world in the way that she wanted to, making sure that things were taken apart and put back together in new ways all the time. And these were some of the summary things that I felt. Am I doing on time? Kind of okay. So this is the kind of the end here, where what do we learn from these women? Ani gekno amawaingeda. So what do these women actually teach us? Ojichagosen, mi ejimikwendaziong, bimadaziong. So this sense of, again, it sounds better in Anishinaabe when to say ojichagosen, you get the idea of soul and reflection having some balance and resonance there. But that the soul, or this sense of central identity, is a reflection and a radiant connection to shared memories. Ikweze eji bogdendagaziyang. I feel like every single one of these four women, they told us that to be a woman is about what you know, what you create, and what you can release, or what you can let go of. Eji ganawab mangwa, mi ganawab mayangadwa, gakanigego, mizueshka. So that one I didn't put the translation, sorry. So the way that we know others is the way that they will know us everywhere that we go. So for us to be understood in all the places that we might be has to do with the way that we're willing to understand others as well. Nisadotamen ejinawendiang api anishinabem tadiyang. We understand our relationships, all of our relationships, whether it's to water, whether it's to the whole ecological landscape, to animals, or each other, when we actually speak our language. It teaches us how we fit into the world. Namikwa gemin ejimikwa madasiyang. And by being amazing, then we find a way to center ourselves, so that that mikwam would be a way of being centered. Ninana kwikamin ina inane toyangai inane diang. And our resistance becomes the way that we can correct or heal or repair one another. You can see in the words that the morphemes echo more in the Anishinaabe when there's no way to really make the English be accurate and have the same resonance. But in the Anishinaabe, when we start thinking about the way that we correct as a kind of healing, if that's what we thought of correction as, a kind of a repair or a healing or a building, it would be a very different thing. Think about how we all would teach different if that's what we thought. Mi ji asamadamang wa jaganayang gema anjasayang abdik anishinaabe and endamoyang gishpin ge jabwing mi wi jibinayang ganawendamang waweka mekgaye ganawendazoyan. So as we are faced with extinction or evolution, it's important to use indigenous languages and philosophies if we're going to get through these times and survive to continue in this universe. I think that as we all look for answers, we look for ways to be in the world, thinking back across examples that preceded us, there's a lot to be learned. When we think about them through different languages, it adds another level that we could use to look at these things. So this is a little concluding poem that I had written after sort of looking at all these women, kind of saying, all right, where do I actually see free thinking? Where do I see women actually making change? And if I pay attention to what they told us, what would I learn from this? I probably need a drink of water. Talk too much, right? And then I'm going to teach you guys a song. This is it. This one, and then the song you guys are going to sing. It's good to sing. So, I'm trying to see which is easier to see. I'll try with this way. Gibagdananzana gag jichakwa gazikenen jijapakaja jichaka seganamana nenchkegon gawin wabanda masanawa kina gego mitigang ashidamewan wedwisayong ejiminoan webien Gibagadinanzinagwa, midashawen amegwa, bakakananjeshkwena deman mewenje gigabakwaman, kakena wawa bandanawa ishkwadagasagon, waka benazuning, ejimino webian. So some of it is just sort of thinking through how would we be more joyful, right? I think that is what we need. And so then really it's remembering what we've been told. So this is my crazy friend Kim Blazer, who's from Gawababiganakak, Ojibwe poet, who's been the poet laureate of the state of Wisconsin and done many amazing things. And we decided that we should remember the mounds. So the big letters in lights there, our friends that are part of the Overpass Light Brigade have letters. And we were saying, everybody should remember. We only have one mound left in Milwaukee, and this is it. So we were out trying to remember and celebrate and actually think what came before us and how do we go forward into the future by recognizing what was in the past. And so this is the one you guys should learn to sing, and then you get your snacks or something, right? Is that the deal? So Mikwenen, so mik is from the concept of, it's a morpheme used for to find a thing, but also to remember, right? So we've got this same little thing that's telling us that our act of remembering is like finding something. And so this is just conjugating it to say, we remember you. So Gmikwenamigo. That's pretty easy. Gmikwenamigo, Jesus, Eje, Zagiasagayan. It's pretty easy. Then we repeat a bunch of stuff because it's a song, right? You need to feel good about it. It needs to be easy for you. Gmikwenamigo, Debik Jesus, Ba Ba Bioyan. So Ba Bioyan is to be waiting. If you're super long waiting, then you use your reduplicative. You say Ba Ba Bioyan. And then it has this little verse that says Mikwenda Gozida, which is that same idea of remembering. We should all remember. Apane Gosha. Apane, both of those are different words that mean like both forever and always, kind of. And then it kind of repeats a little bit. So now it's a plural though. Gmikwenamigom, Ankobijaganak. And Ankobijaganak, Anakobjage is to connect. Anakobijagun is a thing you might use to connect. It's the word we use for great-grandparent and great-grandchild. So it's that concept that the ones before you and the ones after you are your connection. Those are your Ankobijaganak. Gmikwenamigom Enowe Maganak. Enowe is how you make a sound. And when you say Ndenwe Maganak, you're saying my relations, all my relations, Gakana and Ndenwe Maganak. So what you're really saying is all of you that sound like me or share and understand what I'm saying. And then it repeats, right? So I'll go through it once, but then you should join in. Traditionally, we do things 4 times. I won't be too freaked out if you're not singing the first time or the second time, but by the 3rd, you really should try it. And that way, by the 4th, you'll feel very confident, right? Gmikwenamigo, Jesus sejes agiasagean. Gmikwenamigo, dbike Jesus ba babioyan. Mikwenda gozida apane gosha. Mikwenda gozida apane gosha. Gmikwenamigom aniko bijaganak. Gmikwenamigom Enowe Maganak. Mikwenda gozida apane gosha. Mikwenda gozida apane gosha. Okay, now you should try it. Gmikwenamigo, Jesus sejes agiasagean. Gmikwenamigo, dbike Jesus ba babioyan. Mikwenda gozida apane gosha. Mikwenda gozida apane gosha. Gmikwenamigom aniko bijaganak. Gumikwenamegon, Enawe Maganak, Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. See, you tried it, so now the third and fourth are going to be awesome, right? Gumikwenamego, Giza Sejes Agia Segean. Gumikwenamego, Tbeke Gizis Ba Babioyan. Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. Gumikwenamegom Aneko Bijiganak. Gumikwenamegom Hinawe Maganak. Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. Okay, now I'm not going to do it on the microphone because we all got it, right? Ready? Gumikwenamego, Ize Sejes Agia Segean. Gumikwenamego, Tbeke Jesus Baba Miolian. Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. Gumikwenamegom Aneko Bijigana. Gumikwenamegom Inawe Magana. Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. Mikwenda Gozida Apane Gosha. Okay, you also have to give yourselves a big woo! Right? So, Gumigwetchwenenum Gabizendawiak. Thank you for listening. But at least, hopefully, what you've gotten is a sense of how the language sounds. You've heard a lot of it. You've used a little bit of it yourself, but also how we can use language as a methodology, as another way to arrange thoughts, to look at things differently, to reread the collection of quotes that a group of women might give us. So I'm happy to take questions if people have any. I don't know.
I was applauding.
No question? Okay.
I do actually have a question.
Okay, what is it?
I'm interested in many things. Oh, that was awesome. I'm interested in many things. One of the things I'm interested in is in your process of composing, what is the relationship between the lyric and the music?
Oh, that's a good question. So, well, I would say that a lot of times, I mean, when you look at people's learning styles, different people learn different ways. It's definitely true that over many cultures, many centuries, when people are trying to work on pronunciation, one of the things to do is to sing or to somehow give a tune to it. I will typically, like in this presentation, all of these are ones that they're all songs that are mine. But when I was little, we would go to the Indian Center and they would talk to us a lot about where you get songs. And there was this whole thing, like there's this whole practice of song making and singing. And to me, I always felt like that was sort of poetry. Gerald Visner writes a little bit about some of that, and you can go back to some of the early musicology and early ethnography for the Ojibwe in particular. There's the old wax cylinders, the Densmore and everything. What's interesting is that much of it centers in listening. So there are some songs where if you're supposed to reflect on what you're trying to say, the song comes out of the natural world, and then sometimes I'll say, okay, now I want to fit words to that. Like I have one about Gidja Gidja Ganeshi, which is a chickadee, and I really tried to make it sound like the song of that chickadee, Gidja Gidja Ganeshi, you know, like that, just because that's that way that word works. But in here too, even the Gumikwenamego and turning that around, I do think that what I tend to try to do is blend the cadence of our language with some of the morphology, because just that's what interests me. But it typically will sound like it's in the tradition of other songs that are Ojibwe songs. I don't know if that answered it for you. I think the other thing I would say is I got this whole MFA in English, and I had teachers that actually told me, don't write so many of the Ojibwe words. You can put a few in there, but you'll never be able to publish things if you write all in Ojibwe. I should never have listened, right? But maybe at the time it was true, and they lovingly were telling me there isn't a place for that in the world right now. So whether people would give qualitative opinions of my work, I care less than the fact that it's just there, right? So I don't care if you like it or not, but you heard it and it was there, like there it is, right? So I think for me, a lot of times I'll pick words and ideas that I in particular want to play with or make my students remember. Like I do I'll try to put obviatives or transitive endings or something, because they'll remember them easier if I have them in a song. Yeah.
Hi, I'm so happy.
Oh, good. Just happiness is good in general.
We're here, and I'm Candace Falk, and I'm the head of the Emma Goldman Papers.
Excellent.
And
Excellent.
I have to say, Emma
Nice.
Goldman would have loved
Yay.
to
Yay.
know that her words were being
Yeah.
translated.
Good.
And also, since I've been working on this so long, I also have several things that she said about Native American peoples
Yes,
that I can
yes.
pass on to
That's
you.
I'd
love to
I'm
do
sure
that.
you know Ari Weinsweg,
Yeah.
close friend. So I'm sure I've heard a lot of those.
But
So, yeah.
I was curious to
Yeah.
know, like you were making a judgment that all these songs about freedom and ideas about freedom had something resonated with anarchism. And I was thinking, and I could see that totally. But I was thinking that the traditional people had a different, not every traditional people is different.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to say like one big thing.
Right.
But, the way people organize themselves
Yeah.
was often different from that. And I was interested in knowing your thoughts about
Yeah.
the relationship between here, these women thinking about freedom and expression and where that fit into Ojibwe culture.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I will not give you the 1 hour answer, right? But the short answer would be that, yeah, for a long time, I have thought, to me, the whole concept of anarchism, it sounds very Anishinaabeg, right? Like it does. Just the way, if you go back to the Treaty of Greenville and you say when they wrote and they said, we are the Niswe Shkodek and we are writing to you of the 13 fires, the colonies at the time, how we organize ourselves and who we allow to represent us and how much very localized control and how much each individual was encouraged to create for themselves their own life. So much of that, the way I see traditional ideas about how an individual is raised and how an individual finds their place in society, I feel like that is something that when we say we want to do decolonial work, that's something we're trying to pull forward, not move back in terms of technology or, time frame going backward, but to pull those things forward. So I've always thought that those philosophies and social structures were inherently Anishinaabeg. They're not Haudenosaunee. This was a thing we brought up before. They are not Dene. There's many, many other culture groups that they are not, and there maybe are some that are also that way that I don't know. Just speaking for Anishinaabeg, which I had said earlier today to a group, there's 163 federally recognized nations in Canada and the US that say Anishinaabe is their heritage language. It's either Odawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, or a mix of those three in their community, but they are literally 163 in this large diaspora of the Great Lakes. that I would say they probably all felt, well, we've got our own laws right here. And then you bump into another group and you figure out their clan and their system and their dialect and what are they doing. So there's always been a very high tolerance for individual freedom and a lot of support for individual interpretation of all meaning. So to me, I've always thought that I hear in those women who were finding their way at a certain political time echoes of what I feel is inherently Anishinaabeg. But yes, there are times where they will say things about, it always surprises me, like I wish they had all known one another more, right? So there isn't, even Labadee, who lived with the Potawatomi a little bit on the west side of Michigan, there's no sense that any of those people in that movement at the time really truly understood Anishinaabe ontology. It just wasn't, the level of its complexity wasn't made clear at the time, I think. Well, I mean, it was there, but yeah, it's all right. Yeah, so we got to write it out and make sure people know, or at least just share it. Make sure that Maud Kegg's readings, when we read Maud Kegg, we don't just do anthropology. We don't just say this is a description, but this is a set of metaphors that are inherently animate themselves, and they will move forward in their own way, rather than just seeing things as artifacts. So, but yes, well, we're glad you're here. I don't know if other people have questions or... Yeah?
Hi, I think it's good evening now. It's pretty dark out. Thank you for your talk. I really appreciated it. My name is Belgica del Rio, and I'm a student here in performance studies. And I'm just really admiring the way that you open the work with the question of, if I'm talking about women, going into your own spaces, who are the women in my life, and bringing that poetry in, and then also with your daughters and that piece of writing there, and then at the end as well, with that other poet that is talking about, well, what have we learned? What have I remembered? And I was just wondering, how do you sort of choose? And I'm also asking, just as like a younger scholar, starting this line of work in the writing, how do you choose what kind of experiences to bring in and let them shape sort of the architecture or the space that you then delve into these really beautiful questions? Thank you.
Thanks for coming. It's a good question. Trying to think of what is most useful to say, right? I mean, I think that every time is a different time. So what I could do is different than what you will be able to do. And hopefully we're always opening doors for one another. And I do think, though, we still go back and forth, right? So this is a particular space, right? This is actually a very beautiful space. I was invited here by a group of people that clearly are interdisciplinary and interested in seeing Indigenous people as scholars. I think it's always really critical to know what space you're in, and do all the balanced work that you want to do in the way that's best for you. So for me, I'm not going to do good linguistics if I'm not on the side writing songs. Like, I just know that, like I can't say, well, until I get this book done, I'm only doing this. I know that I need that balance to keep both moving forward. So I always did the sort of the creative work in conjunction with, the archival or the data building or the analysis of language. And then you pull them together when it fits for you. So I guess that's probably my best advice, so that we all know if you're a mom, you're a mom, right? Like, all the time, you don't really shut that off. You might be in a space where it's not the thing that you're talking about, but you're still a mom. If you're separating the worlds that you're in and your identities, I think it can get unhealthy. I think of it also in terms of a lot of students now, where we have students who, in the US, people are representing multiple identities. I think this is a problem that back in time, On this continent, we had people who had many identities. Their families would have been, in my region's area, Ho-Chunk and Menominee and Potawatomi and Ojibwe and Sac and Fox and Miami and Illini. And, they would have always been merging multiple ways of knowing and understanding things. And somewhere we started narrowing that. And so then you grow up and you think, I need a major, and then I need to do this. And, you narrow things. And that focus can be good and it can help get things done. But I think if it gets too narrow and you don't allow the other avenues to feed what you're doing, then it gets too hard. So I always just bring my kids into everything and, and just do it anyway. But it's also good, like we were saying today, like Leanne was saying, well, I'm looking forward to seeing what my kids write about their life with language. If I hadn't brought them into it, it wouldn't have been, like Maud Keg is saying, she learned those constellations from the women around her. We all know that the generations before us teach something. It's not just in the teaching spaces. So I like to kind of make sure that we're accounting for all the ways that we learn all the time. So just go for it. Be your whole self all the time. You just might have some venues where you just show only part of it, but still be your whole self all the time. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah. No.
Clay, Tiawank, for your talk. I'm curious to know, because I know that you have a website where you have like some posted songs and poetry. It's like very, and it's an accessible way to kind of like learn some Anishinaabemowin. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how you feel about people who are not Anishinaabe learning the language, because I know that this is something that like everybody I ask, I get a different opinion on, and I think that there's definitely some people who are afraid of people from outside of the culture learning it and using it as a way to have ammunition against the culture or make fun of the culture in some way. So I'm just wondering how you've reckoned with that in your own work, since your own work does make it very accessible.
Right, yeah. Well, two things. One is us Ojibwe, we totally have just, been out there with it all the time. It was a lingua franca kind of in our area. So that's why you have everything from the Hudson Bay down to the Bay of New Orleans, the Mississippi, and all these names that are coming from Ojibwe people naming things, to the extent that in our own region, we called the Ho-Chunk the Winnebago, and they got called that for years till they took back their own name, Ho-Chunkra, and the Menominee, the Natnamanewak still haven't. They still get called the Menominee because we called them in the Menominee, and so I think that you have some culture groups that their role in a geopolitical area is one of just telling, being the translators, being the talkers, being the guides all the time, being the traders. So there's that. So on one hand, Ojibwe language has been so documented for so many years that ship has really sailed no matter what anybody says. They might think it's impossible at this point. The other thing is I think that it comes from not knowing it well. Like, I have no idea why I would care if anybody knew. I would just be delighted. I'd have one more person to argue with and bring it on. Go ahead, learn my language, please. I would love it, right? Why would I not want that? Why would I not want, everybody to just know it, right? To me, if we know our own language well, we have nothing to fear from other people learning it. It's only when we don't feel we have access to it or we don't have it that we get really afraid and say, don't do that. So in our state, the Menominee, and they're just one Menominee nation, they were once terminated by the federal government, their dictionary is on lockdown. They work with one scholar from Madison and they have a password protected website. And I think until enough Menominee feel confident and comfortable and able to defend their language, they just don't want other people learning it as much. And that's their right. I totally respect that. And we have some students in our teacher training program now that do Menominee, and at the little school that I partner with, we have a Menominee class of kids. And so in Milwaukee, we've got some folks learning it. We've got folks up on the res, but it isn't one that I would build a great big website like mine for, because it is one that it's just more fragile. Ojibwe is in no way fragile anymore. There are things that I wouldn't put on there. There's all kinds of songs and all sorts of things that I wouldn't put on the website. But there's also just so much that we can put there. So I hope we've gotten enough people using it, or at least through my example, we show that we definitely, we know our language. go ahead, learn it. We'd love to have more people using it. And again, too, in Milwaukee, where I teach my first year class, it's about half and half, native and non-native. I mean, I teach a class at a big public university. What am I going to say? Half of you can't learn it? Heck no. I feel like if we would have done the right thing, we would have told Nicolette to start using it when he landed in Green Bay. You know, it's like, we'd all be speaking Ojibwe now. I'd be a professor in the Department of Ojibwe, and English would be the foreign language. No, like, you know, right? I mean, it could be that way. So I think that's part of it, where we all just have to think about what it means when we use it. And there's times where we know there's some things we wouldn't put on a big public site, but everything that we put on there is we put it there knowing people might find it and teach with it and use it and learn, and that's great. So yeah, anything found on there, people can do, you know. They always usually email us, and we've had a guy do an opera in Paris. We've had people put it, a lot of indigenous folks use it in their classrooms, so it's good. I don't know if there's other, but yeah.
I thought one of the most exciting parts of your talk to me as a linguist, of course, was your description of the ways in which an Anishinaabe line of poetry will differ in meaning that from the translated line in English. And I'm not even sure what question to ask, but it just somehow, if you're truly a bilingual person, you get a lot more out of this bilingual poem than if you only speak one of the languages, perhaps.
Yeah.
And so it just seems it's very exciting to have this bilingual poetry. But for those of us that don't know Anishinaabe, do you ever go into a poetic analysis of the difference between the English and the...
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's, I guess, two quick things I would say about that. One is that I think for quite a while, the things that I would write, I always did that. Like, just to the extent that I was so careful to get every little piece of meaning that the English poems would be kind of clunky. And then I realized, well, no, I actually speak English fairly fluently. I don't know why I would need to do that, right? So I would have them sometimes with 3 lines in there so that people could see, because I do often use them in like this. We have 6 semesters of Ojibwe, and so in the second year class, we'll talk about them more, sort of do more analysis of them. And the other thing that I realized is, to your point, a lot of people that read it, they don't know. They're not going to see both. But the hope is, if it's out there, someday someone will. So I have to be really pretty careful and be true to the way I know a student will come at it, or some other Ojibwe scholar someday looking at it. So I typically have both. And then sometimes other people do things with them, where like Chad Allen asked me for a poem about a mound that we had both visited. And so I gave it to him, and he wanted that whole 3-line thing. He actually did a really lovely essay about what it meant to be a scholar that couldn't read the Anishinaabemowin, could read the English, and wanted to pick apart the differences. And it was fascinating to me the extent to which he was actually interested in that, not being a speaker of Anishinaabemowin. And so I think there is that out there. People like to see the slippage of the language, even though you're not going to obtain the fluency in the other language. To just see where it's different is very interesting. You know, I feel that way about, you know, when I'll work with, the Oneida and the Ho-Chunk, and there's like, I'm never going to be fluent in those, but it's fascinating to learn well enough to be able to see where it's different. So I think the other thing too is, for a long time, like Poetry Magazine out of Chicago, they're an old magazine. They're over 100 years old, and it wasn't until 2017 that they did one of my poems, and they did it in both languages, full. And that was the first time they said that they had actually published it in both. They actually had previously published some re-expressions of Densmore, but at the time without attributing the original Ojibwe authors. So it's interesting to see how we shift and how we allow sort of indigenous language voices to be out there. That's just maybe a thing that wouldn't have been possible before. So, yeah. But thanks for coming, all of you. There's probably snacks, right, Beth? Yeah.